Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our seminar, Sustainable Dairy Farming Seminar. I suppose from once quotas went and stock numbers went up and that, I suppose a bit of pressure was always going to come on the environment. And as responsible dairy farmers, we have to address that issue. We have two speakers on it tonight. We have Aoife Feeney, who's Dairy Sustainability Advisor in Carbery, and she'll talk about farming for water quality. And we also have David Wall from Teagasc Research Officer, and he'll speak on, is your farm business prepared for change on the sustainability issues? We've a good crowd on board, so we kick off with Aoife, farming for water quality. Aoife.
Thanks a million, Dermot, and thanks to Bandon for having me tonight as well. I'm just going to share my screen now. Gavin, you might just let me know that you can see this okay?
Just coming in, right? Yeah.
You can see it full screen, you can?
We can, yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to discuss a small bit about farming for water quality and the ASAP programme and the Nitrates Directive. And I suppose, as Dermot just said at the start, like there's been a lot of pressure come on since quotas have left, and I suppose a lot of different schemes are coming out of the woodwork since that. So this will give you a bit of a background and a bit of an update as to where we're at in terms of water quality. So just a quick overview of the presentation. We're going to look at the current targets, Ireland's current Nitrates Action Programme and where we're potentially going with that, water quality and where we're at now, the ASAP programme, and then a conclusion at the end and any questions if anyone has them. So just looking at our current water quality targets, so I suppose the key thing really is all member states, all the EU member states have to have their water bodies at good status by 2027 under the Water Framework Directive. So they're all required, I suppose, to abide by the guidelines and rules set out through this directive. And within the Water Framework Directive falls the Nitrates Directive. And I suppose that's the main measure within this to combat against agricultural losses or losses that could arise from farming activities within the industry. So the main aim of that really is to prevent nutrient loss in terms of nitrogen and phosphate from, I suppose, your farms, your land, to water bodies across Ireland. And the Nitrates Action Plan is a further plan within that, so it's quite a complicated structure. Irrigation comes in under that as well. So I suppose the key thing to remember is the nitrates irrigation was formed to protect water quality whilst farming at a higher stocking rate. So while it allows you to keep a higher stocking rate, the main aim was really to I suppose protect water courses going forward. So just at the moment there's a review ongoing this year for the next Nitrates Action Plans. We're currently in what we call NAP4, Nitrates Action Programme 4, and there has been an initial consultation, so that was submitted last week, and there'll be a further consultation I think towards the end of March or beginning of April, and then by the end of the summer there'll be the official review, which will go back to the Department of Agriculture and on to the EU then as well. I suppose within our current Nitrates Action Plan there was a review 2 years ago, and within that we got a lot of additional measures in terms of fencing water courses, camber and roadways, and I suppose the latest one to come out of that is the excretion figure for a dairy cow has gone up from 85 kilos of nitrogen to 89 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. So just to bear that in mind, and again, as I said, more enhanced environmental measures within it. And just to make you aware, if you're not already, the nitrates irrigation application process opened during the week, and anyone who is availing of the derogation, I'd encourage you to get onto your advisors as soon as possible, because you do need to calculate for this figure from 85 to 89 just to see where you're at as well within the current allowances. So I've mentioned already, I suppose it's under review, and what are the main actions under the Nitrates Action Programme. And I am aware that many of you are well aware of these, but I suppose there's a reason for reiterating this as well. So I suppose the current regulations is that you can farm to a maximum of 170 kilos nitrogen per hectare, and anything above that requires a derogation, or else you have to export slurry to take it below that. The other thing then, I suppose, is that there's a closed period for spreading organic and chemical fertilizers. So as you're well aware, we're currently out of that. And within that as well, there is, I suppose, the rules for good agricultural practice in terms of watching the weather and ground conditions for spreading slurry as well. You've got your maximum nitrogen and phosphate rates, minimum storage requirements, and the requirement to maintain your buffer zones and record keeping as well. And then under the new regulations, we have prevention of runoff from farm roadways, prevention of watercourses, prevention of poaching, and I suppose the roadways and the poaching applies to all farms as well that are stocked above 170, regardless of whether or not you're in a derogation. And then the requirement to move your water troughs 20 metres from the watercourse as well. So that's just to reiterate, I suppose, the requirements of farmers at the moment as of the 1st of January 2021. And I suppose looking at the future then of the Nitrates Action Plan and derogation. So I said at the start that, you know, the Nitrates Action Plan, its key measures there are to protect water quality, as is the derogation. And the key thing here really is if we don't gain the improvements in water quality that are required pretty quickly, then we're at risk of losing our nitrates derogation, and we really need to bear that in mind. And ultimately that could lead to a cull in livestock down the line. So when we look at farming and water quality and take a look at the kind of headlines that have been out there over the last few months, I suppose like nitrogen loss from farming, a key factor in the EPA's water quality report, water quality trends going in the wrong direction, nitrates derogation at risk. These are some of the headlines that we've been seeing, I suppose, over the last few months, and I suppose it's quite grim to look at. But it is important that we take heed of them and that we can do what we can, I suppose, as an industry from our side to support farmers, and from your side for farmers to be willing to take on the advice as well going forward. So taking a look at where water quality is at the moment, this is the latest report from the EPA, so this is just a snapshot of the report. I suppose the main thing from it is that water quality was continuing to decline in some areas. We have a lot less pristine water bodies, but we have seen some improvements as well, and I'll come to that in a few minutes. But the key thing here is to look at the figures within the middle, and it's really focusing on nutrient loss and nutrient trends. So 47% of our sites have unsatisfactory nitrogen levels, and 34% have unsatisfactory phosphorus levels. If we look at West Cork or Cork County in general, I suppose nitrogen is the key factor. And it's just important to bear in mind that, you know, our groundwater sites are declining as well. So we have a lot more groundwater sites that have elevated nitrate levels at the moment as well. And it's a very slow process to combat against it. So it's just really important that we're aware of the figures of where we're at. So I think it's just over 50% of our river bodies are meeting the good quality status. So we have to have that at 100% by 2027. So there's a long way to go in terms of water quality, and I suppose, you know, agriculture is a big factor within that as well. So the report shows that 57% of the water bodies are meeting the current requirements, and it has gone up slightly, but there's still a massive chunk there that we have to improve and get to the good status that's required by 2027. So this map, I suppose, just shows where the areas that are more susceptible to nitrogen loss are. So you can kind of, you know, the free draining soils is where nitrogen loss typically occurs. So I suppose that's why my presentation is focused more so around nitrogen tonight. But you can see there down around West Cork, you know, we've got high levels of nitrogen leaching, and we're at higher risk as well of losses due to the soil type that surrounds most of the area that concerns us as well. And I suppose within that, the EPA are well aware of this as well, and going forward, you know, there is a possibility that, you know, there could be tighter regulations on nitrogen susceptible areas. It's very hard to know what way it's going to go at the minute, but it's just something to bear in mind that, you know, it is being looked at quite closely. And then I'm going to talk a small bit now about the Agricultural Sustainability Support and Advisory Programme. So, you know, I've gone through the regulation, and I suppose from that, this programme was born to try and support farmers going forward in improving water quality and helping farmers to put in actions and mitigation measures at farm level. Relatively cheap as cost, we pick the action we cost to farmers. So any farmer who wants to take part, they can either contact myself or you can pass their name through Bandon and get in touch, and we can have a discussion about it. This is the area for action that concerns Bandon at the moment. So it's the Bandon estuary, and I suppose this area was picked because it's estuarine waters. Again, nitrogen is the main concern around this area. Now, they haven't actually started work here at the moment, so testing is due to start, I think, in Q3 of this year. So prior to that, there will be a community meeting held for the Kinsale and Inishannon areas, and everybody in the community will be invited to that. It's usually advertised through Tidy Towns, or even posters put up in local community halls. So when that is being advertised, we'll make sure that it's sent out to suppliers and you can join it online. It'll more than likely be online. We usually hold these in person where possible. And at that meeting, I suppose, LawPro, who carry out the water testing, so they're the local authorities waters programme, and they're a non-regulatory side of the local authorities, I suppose, and they pass any information that they obtain from testing the water bodies is just given to myself and my colleague Lane Giles within the Teagasc office as well. It's not in any way, I suppose, it doesn't impede anybody, and it's quite confidential. But they will conduct that meeting, and then following that meeting, we'll have a farmer meeting where we'll showcase how they actually test the water, what they test for, and from that, then farm visits can take place. Again, it's COVID dependent at the moment, but hopefully we'll be back out in the near future as well. So that's the current map. And I have shared that with Bandon, but I have bigger versions of that to be sent out as well. So if there is any farmer that wants a closer look at that, just get in touch and we can pass that on to you as well. There's no problem there. And like I said, we probably won't have any data on that till the summertime, I'd imagine. And when we talk about nitrogen and phosphate leaching, I suppose there's two key issues. We've got nitrogen leaching through groundwater, and then generally phosphate leaching, I suppose, through overland flow in a heavier soil. So given that we're dealing with a mostly free draining area, I'm going to focus on nitrogen at the moment. And really, we kind of look at what we call the 3 or 4 R's. So it's looking at the right rate, the right time, the right product in the right place. And, you know, a key thing to this is weather, and checking the weather forecast on a regular basis, particularly when you're going with early and late nitrogen, but also throughout the year, depending on what weather events are happening. So these 3 photos on the right hand side, I suppose these are the latest available figures on Met.ie on the agriculture forecast. So the first one there is looking at our soil temperatures. Now I know the figures are quite small there, but I think it was averaging between 3 and 5, 3.5 and 5.5 there throughout the week. So we've gone from quite a cold spell into a fairly wet spell. So soil temperatures are still relatively low. You can look at the accumulated rainfall and also your soil moisture deficits. And it's really important to be checking these when we're spreading slurry or nitrogen, because if you're going out in conditions that aren't ideal, the likelihood is that nitrogen is getting lost to groundwater. And there's no other way for it to go, really. If the plant and the soil aren't able to take it, then it's been lost directly to groundwater. And the EPA gave a figure there last year that approximately €75 million is lost due to nutrient loss. That's what they've estimated in terms of the nutrients that could get lost to groundwater. So, you know, it's quite a significant amount when you put it in monetary terms as well. But if there's one thing really to take from this slide, it's that, you know, checking your weather forecast, especially this time of year, is key. Like, we've got quite a wet week now at the moment. You know, if people are spreading slurry, you can tell straight away where it's going. And the slurry that's spread today and ends up in groundwater might not show up in testing for another 3 or 5 years, depending on the flow. So it's quite a long turnaround, which means it's quite a long time to try and get the turnaround to good status as well and to mitigate against it. And when we're out at farm, I suppose, you know, it's really just trying to look where there might be potential losses in terms of farmyard and land management, but then educating farmers around the right application rate, the right product, the right time, and the right location. All right. And then I suppose other ones of nutrient losses on farms. So the big one, it's the hardest one to combat against because it's all about source control, but we have some other areas that can, I suppose, have losses from them as well. So the first one here is the farm roadways. So as I said at the start, the new regulation states that your farm roadways have to be cambered away from watercourses. So this is an example of a roadway. Now it's not perfect, there's still some work to be done on it, but you can see the first picture on the left hand side. Firstly, it was quite a dirty roadway, so it probably wasn't being cleaned down as often as it should have been. And this photo was taken in summertime as well, so it was quite a wet week at the time. But you can see the water was getting lost straight away, the nutrient-rich water into the stream on the right-hand side. So the farmer did a good bit of work on this. He raised it on the right-hand side, and all fall of water now is going straight into the field on the left. Now, there's still a bit of work to be done in terms of fencing the watercourse on the roadway, and he's planning to plant a hedgerow there as well, so that it's an extra mitigation measure. But I just thought it was a good example of how bad it can get, even during the summertime when they're not kept clean enough, and when you've got heavy rainfall, and then how he has changed it. And again, as I said, more work to be done on it, but that's one of the key examples that we've come across. And I think nearly 2/3 of the farms I've walked over the last few months, all of them had roadway issues. So if you have any questions on that, or you're just not sure, myself or your local advisor as well, they'd have a good idea too. But it's really where you've got a stream running alongside your roadways or a drain, you really need to take a look at them and see if any work has to be done on them. And as the regulation states, that has to have been done really by the 1st of this month, so you really want to be checking it if you haven't already. The other key issues we've come across, silage effluent, either leaking through cracked pits or else point source pollution. Now, to be fair, the effluent issues were actually few and far between, and the majority occurred after storm damage back in August, where drains were blocked up really from storm debris. And the other issue was maybe where silage pits were filled beyond the channels as well, so we had some leaching occurring then. The thing with effluent, it's extremely potent, it's got a high oxygen demand. So you're going to see what we kind of call sewage fungus growing pretty quickly in a river when you've got excess effluent, and it's a pretty good indication then if we have effluent issues. So, you know, just before you're filling the pits and after filling them, you just want to be double checking that the channels are all unblocked, and that you've no losses occurring. And again, if you're unsure, like, you just get in contact with myself or your local advisor, and we can check it out for you as well. Point sources, again, we haven't come across a huge amount of them. Majority that we have come across, like, have been kind of from drains, where there was something leaching into a drain and then that was getting into a main water course. Storage, again, has been a bit of a problem where there isn't enough storage and times. And that's an issue then turn nitrogen again, or else things then flow straight into a stream, which will carry phosphate with it then as well. Again, another common issue is not separating clean and dirty water enough, or maybe not being sure of what has to be separated. But, you know, they're, I suppose, not as significant in many instances. It's a mild form of nutrient loss, but every small change could have an impact. If every farmer on a river or in an area for action was to implement one small change at their farm, you're soon going to have an effect where you'll start to see improvements when everyone is doing it. So I'd really urge you to get in contact if you're interested in having a farm assessment done, because there's usually something small that every farmer can do, and there's a lot of good stuff being done out there at the moment as well. And it's really important to acknowledge that too. You know, no farmer wants to be polluting or is doing anything intentionally that I've ever come across yet, which is good. But I suppose the one key thing over the last few months was just to watch that slurry spreading and spreading of nitrogen and the forecast. It's really, really important to heed that, because it's the single hardest thing to mitigate against, and I suppose it's the biggest issue we have in Cork County at the moment. If we look at heavy soils then, just a quick run through on heavier soils. So it's usually phosphate leaching that will occur with heavier soils. And I suppose it's where you're going to have runoff overland into streams or drains. So if you've got hilly fields or your rivers aren't fenced, you're probably going to have more leaching of phosphate into the rivers then. Storage again, and farmyard manure storage can be an issue in heavier soils. Sorry, excuse me. And again, roadways and water troughs, as I mentioned earlier, are a problem there too. So buffer zones are really, really important in heavy soil areas. Maintaining your buffer zone of 2 and 5 meters is really important, especially the wetter times of the year. But I suppose all year round really, but at the wetter times you'd want to be keeping back that extra few meters to try and prevent any runoff into streams or drains. Anywhere you have a drain, it's more than likely going to connect to a stream at some point or a groundwater source. So it's important to treat them the same way as drains as well, or as streams as well going forward. So just looking at ASSEP, and I suppose beyond this year, it's looking likely that there'll be an expansion of the programme. Now it's not confirmed as of yet, but hopefully we'll kind of hear in the next few months there will be a public consultation for it. And the hope is that there'll be new areas for action added to it as well. So just taking a quick look now, this, as I said at the start, it's not confirmed. It could look like there'll be more areas added to it, potentially along Bandon River. So, you know, it's a good thing, because if we have more areas of action, the more we can do as an industry, I suppose, and work together. You know, there has been a decline in water quality, but there's also been an improvement in water quality in the areas for action that are existing. So there's 190 across the country, and there's been improvements in 17% of those, where farmers are working closely with ASSEP advisors. So it is showing that the advice that's been given and the farmers that are working within the programme, you know, that their efforts are working and water quality is improving in those areas for action. And we'd hope to continue that across West Cork. Now, we've very little results at the moment, but hopefully by midsummer, towards the end of summer, results that will hopefully be showing improvements as time goes on as well. So that was a very quick run through, I suppose, where we're at in terms of the Nitrates Directive. And I suppose, you know, the key things there, we have to meet our water quality targets. We're just over 50% of the way there. And we've got 6 years effectively to get the rest of the way there. So 2027 is the target, and I suppose beyond that then we're probably looking at serious sanctions for not meeting it. Now, you know, our nitrates derogation is up for review at the moment. It's very hard to know what way that's going to go. Are we going to have more, I suppose, rules and regulations with it? Are we going to be lucky enough to get it again? It's very hard to know at the minute, but we'd be hopeful, you know, that the likes of the work we've done within the ASSEP programme, and there's plenty of other good projects going on around the country as well, including the agricultural sector, and we'll hope that they'll play into our plea to hold on to it as well. So we won't really know until later on in the year how that's going to go. As I said already, the water quality is improving in the PAAs, so we want to keep that going. So I'd be encouraging any farmer who's interested to get in touch tonight. Pass on your details to either Gavin or myself, and we can arrange something. If we don't address what I've mentioned, I suppose our derogation is at serious risk. And you know, we've got a good opportunity over the next few months to really put in the efforts, and hopefully we'll start to get improvements. As I said before, summer is out, we'll get some feedback on that as well. And the key thing really with nitrogen, the right place, the right time, the right rate, and the right product. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll hand you back to Dermot. If there's any questions, we can answer those as well. Thanks a million. I'll just stop sharing there.
Yeah, sorry. Thanks, Aoife. Thanks for that. There were a couple of questions in, Aoife, and I should have said at the start that people can get into chat on the bottom of their phone or screen and send in any question you have on the night, and we'll deal with them. First question, Aoife, why is only one side of the Bandon Estuary included in the ASSEP programme?
It's selected off of a subcatchment basis. So there are two sides, but it's really selecting, I suppose, the various water bodies that are feeding into it at the moment. Now that will probably be expanded next year if the programme is renewed. But I suppose the west side of it is quite small at the moment compared to the east side. But it's to do with the flow of the land and the water feeding into it at the minute, but it probably will be expanded.
Okay, and the second one, the example of the farm roadway that you showed, rectification is pointless since the overall gradient of the land is still toward the stream, and all that's happening, that effluent is sitting on the left-hand side and just soaks across the roadway into the stream anyway.
No, so I suppose it's probably not the best photo examples. No, it's cambered much higher on the right-hand side, so any rainfall that's fallen on that now, it's going straight across into the field. And further up from it as well, there's culverts to divert it off earlier as well, just as an extra mitigation measure. Now, it isn't a perfect example, there's more work to be done on it. But the key thing with that really was, the first example of where it wasn't scraped down, it wasn't kept clean, that was during the summer as well. You have to remember that too. It probably shouldn't have been the way it was. But the gradient of it is going into the field now. It probably just isn't a great quality photo.
But if you have a steeper hill coming to it, you have a problem, don't you?
If you had a steeper hill, you'd probably have to look towards moving the roadway altogether.
Okay, and just to talk about the ASSEP programme, it's totally voluntary, obviously, and it's advice around just water quality, as I understand it.
Yeah, so I suppose it's a fully free and voluntary programme up until the end of this year anyway, and hopefully it'll be renewed going into next year. Anything I suppose that comes of it is between myself and the farmer. It doesn't go any further. So any report that's drawn up is just between me and the farmer. Nobody else sees it. And I suppose the general advisory actions that we pick, we agree on them together, and we try to pick the cheapest options that the farmer can actually put in place. There's no point in us selecting options that either a farmer can't afford or isn't willing to do. But 9 times out of 10, the actions that are picked are either carried out, or sometimes it's just a case of advisory and education. But there hasn't been any farm yet who hasn't done what was recommended or has disagreed with anything that was recommended, which is great. We've had good enough uptake in it in the Clonakilty region at the moment.
Okay. Ger Brickley, do you want to come in there?
No, Dermot, sorry, no, just clearing the questions that were answered.
Okay. I suppose the other point about the ASSEP programme, it's buying us a few years to get our act together, and like all these things, it's voluntary now, but we'll have to get our act together in the next few years because that'll change.
Absolutely. I think if we can show that we're being proactive, the more people that get involved, the better. And there's been plenty of farms that haven't had to do a whole lot of work. It's really just kind of being more aware of where losses can even occur makes a massive difference. But I'd encourage all farmers to at least get in touch, and we can go from there, and you can decide whether it's for you or not then. But to date, there hasn't been a farmer who hasn't got benefit from it. So I just really encourage everyone to get in contact about it.
Aoife, I know this is a fair question, but Carbery obviously take a lot of water out of the Bandon River and put water back, and would be testing the river. Do you see the water deteriorating or holding its own, or?
Yeah, so I suppose we because we're so conscious that we take the water from the river, we do regular testing on it. And again, similar to many areas for action, there's a number of pressures, including agriculture and then wastewater treatment industry as well. But agriculture is probably becoming more of an issue in terms of nutrient losses. It's the single biggest source of nutrient loss on it. So we will be willing to work with farmers in all the areas across the Bandon River, not just in areas for action under the ASSEP programme. So any farmer really that's interested in getting involved, we're willing to talk to and carry out farm assessments on. And then from our own side, I suppose, we're constantly carrying out rigorous testing to make sure that we can do our bit to ensure there isn't any deterioration to water quality as well.
Yeah. And the other thing, I suppose, before we finish, where it is a non-farming issue that's being dealt with by other people, it's not as if it's being ignored.
No, absolutely not. So I suppose, I should have said that from the beginning. The ASSEP programme is the agricultural side of it, but the entire programme I suppose includes the county councils, the EPA, ourselves then, and the wider industry as well. So if there are any issues arising from the likes of wastewater treatment or industry, they work closely with either their local county council or the EPA, depending on what the kind of business is. So there's plenty of work being done around the country on wastewater treatment as well, and there's a lot of work to be done yet with that too. But it's been, I suppose, divided as is appropriate. So when the Law Pro team do their water assessments, they can tell straight away whether agriculture is the main problem, or whether it's wastewater treatment or the likes of septic tanks or something like that, or industry pressures. So any agricultural issues come to me, the other issues then are given to the relevant bodies that need to deal with them.
Okay, thanks, Aoife.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, it's very comprehensive, I think. You can keep the questions coming and we'll deal with any of them after for Aoife or for whatever, but we'll move on. I suppose one other thing, Gavin sent out a link the other day on WhatsApp on soil temperature, and maybe Gavin, you might bring it to us at the finish as well. Just that people are aware of it, the soil temperature gauge in Dara, I presume. Next we move to David Wall, Teagasc Research Officer, and the title of his presentation is Your Farm Business Prepared for Change? So over to you, David, and welcome. David, you're muted.
Apologies. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, loud and clear now.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dermot. Thanks to Carberry for the invitation to speak to you tonight. I suppose what I want to talk about is following on from Aoife. Aoife's quite nicely teed things up in terms of the challenges that face farmers, faces all as part of the industry. I'm working with Teagasc and Johnstown Castle. I'm also farming myself, and we're dairy farming at home. So I know the challenges from I suppose the everyday practicalities at home, but also then when I go into the work setting in terms of listening to the commentary from our regulators, be it the Department of Agriculture, but more so now the Department of Environment. So we think about the Department of Agriculture in terms of nitrates, and that, yes, they administer it, but the derogation and that is actually the under the control of the Minister for Agriculture or for Environment. So it's worth knowing that and considering that, and the rhetoric is changing. So heretofore, since 2006, we're all well used to it at this stage. We've been under regulation since 2006. Water quality was going in general in the right direction, right? We started off in Ireland with a fairly good base compared with some other countries in Europe. However, we were holding our own, if not improving in some areas. Obviously, there was issues in the past in other areas, but by and large, if you take a national snapshot, we were slowly moving in the right direction. However, all that has changed since 2015, right? There's a number of reasons, and we all know that there's a number of reasons. You know, there's changes there in terms of other sources, as Aoife had said, you know, industry, urbanization, wastewater, septic tanks, whatever. However, as farmers, we also need to stand up and be counted ourselves, and rather than taking what's left over and have people attribute that to agriculture, we need to be first out of the blocks and say, this is what we're doing, this is our sustainability of the system, this is what's going into our systems, this is our use efficiency, and then let them find out where they attribute the rest that they can't account for, right? Too long we've been on the hind tit, as the fella says, we get attributed as agriculture from what's left over. So why not get out of the blocks first and say, okay, this is what we're contributing. This is the losses that attribute to agriculture, and we're moving in the right direction and we're minimizing those going forward. So the game has changed, I suppose. The water quality is not going in the right direction now, and the finger is being pointed very quickly. So in terms of agriculture, as Aoife has quite rightly said, phosphorus is an issue in heavy soils where there's runoff, where the water can't go through the soil for it to be filtered. And nitrogen is the opposite. So if we think about nitrates, if you think about magnets, for instance, magnets, if you have a positive and a negative, they're going to attract one another in terms of magnets pulled. If you have two positives, they're going to repel one another. And unfortunately, nitrate is negatively charged, and also your soil is negatively charged. So nitrogen will go straight through your soil if the water is flowing and if the plant and the roots don't take it out on the way. So if we think about the season and what we're doing during the season, when the water is not flowing or not leaching out, so if we get rainfall in the summer, even heavy rainfall, usually we don't get a leaching event because it's only filling the sump. It's only filling up the soil with water. However, if the soil is already saturated, that's like a piston going through. It's pumping, pushing the water that's already under it. If you put a head of water on top of the soil, it's pushing it down through. So at this time of the year, if we put nutrients into the soil, there's very little demand for nutrients in terms of growth. It's going to push the nutrients with the water out of the soil. So I suppose if we think about that in monetary terms, in terms of our own pockets, if it's something that we're buying from the co-op, buying in a bag, you don't want to be losing it. You don't want to be putting it out there for it to be pushed out, and it's not a great return on investment. Overall, in terms of agriculture and in terms of grass-based systems, somewhere in the region of 20 to 30%. On average, 25%, so a quarter of the nitrogen that we actually purchase and put into the system is actually recovered. Now, in a business sense, that's a fairly poor return on investment, that 75% of the nitrogen is potentially lost out of the system.
Sorry, David. I don't mean to interrupt you, but have you slides moving there? We've the same slide from the start.
No, I haven't. I'm only rambling at the moment, Dermot. So
okay, that's fine. Okay, sorry about that. Okay.
At the moment. So that kind of sets the scene in terms of where we're at. If we think about where we've come from since 2006, many of you will have derogation plans, many of you will have soil samples and plans otherwise, but as dairy farmers, there's likely a fair cohort of derogation there. You put in your derogation application every year with your advisor, and if that derogation gets approved, it's assumed by the Department of Agriculture, number one, that you're compliant, that you have the necessary storage, that you're putting out the right rates of nutrients, etc. So maximum 250 kilograms with the fertilizer spreader, the whole 9 yards. And that has been great. And that has been reported then to Europe every year since 2006. So we were getting good feedback from Europe when the Department of Environment and Department of Agriculture would go out. Water quality was going in the right way, and they were saying, okay, the level of rules that you have, they're obviously working. Your water quality is improving slowly but surely. It's taking time, but the rules that you have are improving. Now, since 2015, water quality is going in the wrong direction. So Europe is coming out and they're saying, okay, what's gone wrong? Your rules were working. Everybody is compliant because we have the reports. You've applied for your derogations. And now things are going bad. So Europe is turning around and it's basically saying, okay, your rules are no longer working. As Department of Environment and Department of Agriculture, you need more rules. And if we keep going this way, we will get more and more rules until potentially, as Aoife says, the derogation will be rescinded. So it's not a God-given right for any of us. You have to apply. If you meet the spec, you get it. If you don't meet the spec, you don't. However, Ireland, Inc., if we think about Ireland in general, other countries like the Netherlands have had their derogation rescinded for 2 years, and they were told to cull 75,000 cows, which happened in 2018. So again, this can happen. It's not like head in the sand stuff here. I'm telling you this because I'm a dairy farmer myself. We're also in derogation, and if collectively, if my neighbours, if I do the right thing and my neighbours don't, if collectively water quality keeps going in the wrong direction, my derogation as well as my neighbour's derogation will be gone. So I'll get into the slides. That's a little bit of the doom and gloom, but I think it's important to say it. We have investment at home. We're after building a shed. We're about to build a parlour. If I lose my derogation, I won't be able to pay for that investment, and I'll be in between a rock and a hard place in terms of what I'm doing. So it's a risk to my business. When I went to the bank manager and said, I want a loan for this, he looked at the risk in terms of to the bank. I'm looking at the risk now in terms of my farm. And you know, as my dad says, heretofore we haven't had to sell any land to get out of a fix. And I don't want to sell any land in my generation to pay for my loans either. So it is a risk, and it's something that we need to consider. So if we move forward into the presentation that I'm going to give, we know about nitrates. However, there's a new kid in town, unfortunately, right? And this is the farm to fork strategy. It's coming from Europe. It's about to hit in probably 2022. And it's where the European consumer and the European Union want to make the landscape more sustainable. And agriculture on that landscape is obviously the custodian of the landscape, or the majority of the landscape, and they want agriculture to get in line as well. It states that they want to reduce nutrient losses by at least 50%. That's a huge, tall order, to take 50% of the nutrients that are either naturally lost, because let's face it, every piece of land, whether it's in a natural state or it's being farmed, is going to lose some nutrients. And the river has capacity to handle a quantity of nutrients. It's only when the nutrient losses get high enough and cause a problem that there's an issue. And what they have said is, the signal from Europe is that they're going to cut fertilizers across Europe by 20%. Fertilizer use by 20%. Now, to me as a farmer, red flag straight away. I'm beginning to worry now. I have to feed me stock. I'm in a grass-based system. I don't want to be using more concentrates because it's going to take money out of my pocket. So can I feed my stock, grow the amount of grass that I need with 20% less fertilizer? So again, now I'm trying to think about my strategy. How can I do that in my farming system? How can I get more efficient with the fertilizer that I'm allowed to use, the slurry, where I do it, where I go, when I go in the year? I don't want to be spreading a lot of nitrogen fertilizer when I'm not getting the response. So now I'm thinking about the right time, the right place, the right product, and the right rate, as Aoife has put it, straight away. Why is this regulation coming up? Because of air emissions, and we hear that in the news all the time now, soil, water, and climate impacts. And I suppose reduced biodiversity, which you're all about to hear. I suppose in the next few years, biodiversity is becoming more and more an issue. So I suppose if I was to take anything from this slide, as a farmer myself, but for ye, I want you to be aware that this piece of legislation is there in the background, and in 2022, if you have to go into a farm and face a farming year with 20% less fertilizer, how are you going to do it? The other thing that's being mooted here by the department is that there will be no hiding this fertilizer anymore. That fertilizer now will be linked potentially to your herd number. It'll be a bit like the pesticide register. So you can't buy pesticides without having your herd number, etc. This is going to happen more than likely for fertilizers, according to what we hear. Okay, so that's enough of the doom and gloom. How are we going to go about this? If we know that some farms have between 20 and 25% of use efficiency, the only way is up. We surely can do better. We surely can get more efficiency about the fertilizer that we apply. So can we get 20% more efficiency to allow us still to grow the same amount of grass, keep the same amount of stock, and ultimately pay less for fertilizer, but keep our farming business the way it is? If we think about growing grass, where do the sources of fertilizer or where do the sources of nitrogen come? And what I'll say before I start this slide is the fertilizer is only the top up. It's not the majority of the nitrogen or the nutrients that we have. So if we think about the soil nitrogen supply, even in your light soils down there in Bandon or the greater Bandon area, we still probably, most of those soils are certainly contributing 100 kilos of nitrogen, if not probably in the region of 150 kilos on average. But if we take 100 and keep conservative here, we can grow 6 tons of grass from the soil only if you didn't spread a bag of fertilizer, right? We think about the next bit, the cow, what's she returning? So the stocking rate, the cow is eating grass, she's out there grazing, and most of the nitrogen is not going off in the milk or in the calf that she's producing every year, but it's been recycled out through the back end in dung and urine, especially the urine patch. It's loaded with nitrogen. So one urine patch would be equivalent of 1,000 kilos per hectare in that one little urine area, if you were to spread it, if every area was hit with the same urine patch. So a huge amount of nitrogen coming out of the back end. And if we think even a derogation stocking rate of 210 there, now we're up to about 310 kilograms of nitrogen sloshing around in the system, and we're happily growing about 10 tons of grass. So if we get into the last piece of the puzzle, then either the slurry spreader or the bag of fertilizer, we're really only topping up the system to get us up there to the NAE that are growing 14, 15, 16 tons. So in total there's about 560 kilograms of nitrogen sloshing around in the system. But what I'll say to you there is we're limited to 250, and some people think that 250 is not enough to grow this grass. Probably when you add all this together, you can see there's a huge amount of nitrogen in the system before we even think about the bag of fertilizer. So when we use it, what rate we use, etc., is really, really important here. Okay, why build soil fertility? Why you know, can we not just put out the nitrogen fertilizer? Let's not worry about soil fertility per se. And what I'll say to you is the research that I'm doing and have been doing for the last 10 years across farms like yours, we've had farms in the area down there in the Timolee catchment, the Clonakilty experiment as well down on the Clonakilty farm, and then more farms along the area. What we're finding there is that there's no substitute for building an index. So if you don't have your soil fertility right, you mightn't notice it. If you're spreading enough fertilizer, you'll mask the deficiency. And in terms of relative fertilizer use efficiency, if you put out more, you'll overcome it. But what we're finding there is that at index 1 and 2 for phosphorus and for potash, we're wasting on average about 15% of the nitrogen you're putting out. So every 100 kilos of nitrogen or every 100 units that you put out, you're wasting 15 of it before you even start. And this is one area that we can actually save in terms of doing the soil samples. Remember, anybody that's in a derogation, you're doing the soil samples because you have to. However, they're your soil samples, you're paying for them. Why just do them for the Department of Agriculture to get your derogation? look at them, look at the historic ones that you have and see where you're going to and where you could improve in terms of putting the right fertilizer, buying the right compounds if you need them, or going with the slurry spreader to the right place rather than the pet field where it all goes out to if the tank is full. So again, there is a big saving to be made here. pH, P and K, getting the lime out first and optimizing the P and K. That's going to maximize, the first place to maximize your soil fertility. Okay, in terms of reducing nitrogen loss, many that are in derogation are going to have to use low emission slurry spreading. And again, this is another technology that works. You might find it costly in terms of getting into it or the difference between the splash plate and it, but it does what it says in the tin. There's no gimmicks here, and it works. So again, this is results here showing the hours after application and the percentage of total nitrogen in the slurry being lost as ammonia, as a gas. And you can see there with the splash plate, within 1 or 2 hours, you're losing 30, maybe 40% of the nitrogen that you're putting out with the slurry tanker there if you get the day wrong. So if you're going out on a bare stubble right after first cut silage, the sun is splitting stones, basically you're into this scenario. Probably you can write off 40, 50% of the nitrogen that you're putting out with the slurry tanker on that day with a splash plate. However, if you're going to go out the same day with a trailing shoe, where you're limiting the amount of surface area, so it's all about sun baking this stuff off the grass. If you limit the amount of surface area, you put it in lines, there you can cut the nitrogen loss in half or even less straight away. So again, you're getting more nitrogen for every 1,000 gallons that you're spreading. So with the trailing shoe, we're getting about 6 units per 1,000 gallons, 5-6 units per 1,000 gallons. With the splash plate, we're getting 9, 10, 11 units per 1,000 gallons. So again, there's a saving straight away with nutrients that you don't have to buy. The other way to do this, and why spring spreading is being advocated by your advisors and by everybody, is on an overcast day. So when I would say it's not raining, ground conditions are good, the wipers on the tractor are on intermittent, but it's not really raining, it's just to keep the fog off the windscreen, that's probably the best day for spreading slurry, because you don't have the sun that's going to bake off that nitrogen. So early spreading, but not too early, and low emission slurry spreading, that's going to maximize the amount of nitrogen that you have in the tank at home. If we look there, just to give you a ballparks, what we think about a splash plate spread, 1,000 gallons, what is it in fertilizer terms? It's worth a bag of 5,532. So you can see there, plenty of P, plenty of K in it, however, a low amount of nitrogen. And if we were to put a value on that, it's worth about €23. If we think about the trailing shoe there, the only figure that really changes is the nitrogen. However, we're almost doubling it in terms of what we're getting out. So if I was putting out 3,000 gallons of this with a splash plate, we're getting about 15 units of nitrogen. If I'm putting out the same amount of slurry, 3,000 gallons with a trailing shoe or a dribble bar, I'm getting the equivalent of a baggy can. I'm getting 27 units. So again, what a good way to cut nitrogen, to save on nitrogen, and pay yourself back in terms of your pocket. Save it and put it into something else. Put it into your P's and K's, put it into your lime. Next one here is protected urea. Why protected urea? You've probably heard a lot about it. Hopefully many are trying it and are getting decent results. And if you haven't tried it to date, maybe think about it for even a pallet of it for the year coming on. The issue here is greenhouse gases and nitrogen losses again. So if we think about nitrogen losses, ammonia losses in particular. If we can't meet ammonia losses, potentially there's a national herd cull coming. So it stands to reason if we can save ammonia emissions from fertilizer, then that allows a little bit more ammonia emissions to come from the housing of animals and that kind of a deal. It takes the pressure off the stocking rate issue. The other advantages here in terms of protected urea, it's cheaper than CAN for the main season, slightly dearer than straight urea. However, you can use it confidently out into the summer. So most people are happy to use urea up to around April, and then they'll switch over to CAN. You don't have to follow the weather with the protected urea. You can spread on the good day. You don't need rainfall the same way as you do with urea to get it going, and you'll get good results the whole year round. This is the Clonakilty trial at Clonakilty Farm, where CAN protected urea in the light green and urea straight, conventional urea in the orange are spread on paddocks side by side. You'll see there in terms of no nitrogen, what's been produced. That's in the red bar here. And here in the spring, you can see the protected urea is doing slightly better even than the CAN and better than the urea. Again, in the second round, so this is your first round, your second round. In the third round there, whatever is going on, urea was doing slightly better, but that could be an anomaly in the thing. Again, the fertilizers are doing the same through the summer. So there's no penalty here. You're getting a cheaper nitrogen product than CAN. You're keeping more nitrogen on the ground. You're protecting the national livestock and taking the pressure off the number of livestock we have nationally. And you're saving in terms of your pocket. So again, it's a little bit of a no-brainer here. Protected urea works. It does what it says on the tin. And what I would say to you is, if you haven't tried it, try at least a pallet, see how you get on. If the grass is not growing, it doesn't matter what you put out. We heard a lot of issues in terms of protected urea during the drought, but it wouldn't matter what you spread during the drought. There was no or limited growth, and it wasn't an issue between CAN and urea. Another issue that happens with urea is in the first couple of rounds in the spring, when the soil temperatures are low or the grass is saturated, urea goes out, and then all of a sudden, come April, CAN goes out after it, and hey presto, things take off. And many people think that the urea wasn't working. CAN is better for my farm. And that's not the case. We've looked at this in your local area here in Clonakilty, and we have about 11 more trials like this, where they're side by side in either plots or on the dairy platforms in paddocks side by side or split paddocks, and we can't see any difference. So I would confidently say at least try it. I suppose if we get into the final couple of slides, how are we going to do this? How are we going to save nitrogen at the right times of year, use nitrogen when the grass is growing to maximize our yield or maximize our silage pit, and try to get it right? This is not complicated, first and foremost. Fertilizer planning, you'll know your ground better than I will, better than any advisor will. However, I suppose it's a bit like going back to basics and thinking about what's going on here. We've kind of got interested as dairy farmers. I know myself, we've started calving, and my attention is turned to calving. And what we traditionally would have done was, well, I'll get the urea out early because I'm going to be calving next week and I won't have time to do it. However, I've discovered here at home, I'm on light soil, same as ye, I'm right beside the sea, that I was wasting nitrogen. I was putting out too much urea. I was putting out urea on top of slurry, and it wasn't needed. The grass is not growing. If we look at the grass growth curves, and I'll show you pasture-based figures in a minute, we have two types of soils mostly on every farm. You'll be probably more along the green line, the well-drained soils. However, everybody has a field or two that's heavy, right? If we think about what's going on there in terms of grass growth in the spring, the light soil will drain And when the day is good and the temperature is up, the air will get into that soil and warm it up quicker. So it will respond after cold temperature, it'll get colder quicker, and after warmer temperature, it'll get warmer quicker. I bet you if you go back and look at your soil temperatures 2 weeks ago, they were probably higher than they are today. And the issue was, we got that cold snap there last week, and because you're on free draining soils, the water went out of them, and the air, that cold air, got into them and cooled them back down again. If you went to your poorly drained soil, has probably been the same the whole way along because it's saturated. The cold or the warm is not going to affect it till eventually it dries out. And this is why the red line there, these soils are going to be later soils. You're probably talking about Paddy's Day on those before they really take off in terms of growth. So my question then, or putting it back to everybody here in the meeting, is why put out nitrogen or put out slurry on those soils, even if they're marginally heavy, if there's no uptake potential and you're having that nitrogen hanging out there for longer in the spring when it's potentially lost? Even if it's a job that you're busy and that kind of deal, and you feel that you're going to get something done there, it's a little bit of a waste. You probably know it, if you can't travel with the tanker or you can't travel with a tractor in a paddock, there's no business for nitrogen in it or any other fertilizer. On the other ones then, we need to be looking at the soil temperature, number one. Grass won't grow below 5.5 degrees. You're like myself, you're in a long grazing or a growing season, you probably have 11 months of growth down there. However, we have to keep it between the ditches in terms of how much we're putting out. If we're growing 5-6 kilos, there's no point in putting a full bag of urea out. It's not going to help it be recovered any quicker. You're still growing 5-6, you might push it up to 10, but at 10 kilos, your nitrogen demand is very, very small. Your nitrogen demand per day, you're probably talking about 1/4 of a unit per day. So why put out 46 units in a go round if the 46 units is going to last you nearly 2.5 months? It's just some of that is going to be lost if you're putting it out in January. So what I would say to you is, look at the soil temperatures, look at how much saturation is there. If the ground is saturated and remains saturated with the rainfall, grass needs light, it needs air, and it needs a good temperature to grow. If air is limited because the ground is saturated, basically the grass will switch off and it won't grow. And it won't grow as vigorously. So what I'm saying to you is, I'm not saying don't spread nitrogen. What I'm saying is spread a little bit, enough for the conditions that you have at the moment. And if you think you don't need it, hold off for a couple of weeks even, and then apply it. I know it's a routine job that we do and we go out, but given that things might change in the future, if I was to say to you, where would you take 20% of your nitrogen out over the year? I think I'd be taking out more in terms of that first round, because it's just not needed. If I can save even 10% of it in the first round, I can use more of it when the grass is growing. I'm not cutting back my total yield on the farm. I know it's very valuable grass and the practicalities there. So that first period, if we say up to the first round, up to about the 10th of April there, maybe the 1st of April on some of your farms because you're very early there, we need to be either going with, on the dry soils, either slurry or protected urea, or conventional urea if you're still in that mode, no more than 1/2 bag. I would say even slightly less than 1/2 bag if you have the setting calibrated on your fertilizer spreader. Again, slurry, if you can take out a few loads with the contractor, take out 4 or 5 loads out of the tank just to give you a bit of headspace, that's probably enough. Why empty the whole tank if you're not going to get the value out of it? I know it's a job done again, but we need to be thinking more strategically. Can the contractor come back again when he gets around a few other farms and the pressure goes off can you get them back in 3 weeks, 4 weeks time when your tank is back filling, and get the value out of that slurry and that nitrogen at a better time. In terms of the second round there, really important to drive this peak is we either need slurry or we need the compound. And that comes in the second round. We don't need that here in January or February, but probably in your second round of fertilizer, and that's probably heading for early March to about Paddy's Day, somewhere in there. And a well-timed compound, especially phosphorus, in that part of the year is going to drive this peak even higher. Remember, soils are cold and wet. If soils are cold and wet, phosphorus is going to be locked away because the biology there in the soil and the roots are not going to be active enough to mop it up. So by giving the soil a helping hand there in March, you're going to drive this onset of peak growth from, you know, I would say early March is a good time to get that out. You're probably earlier ground down where you are. The last week of February, first week of March, if ground conditions allow, that's a good time to go with slurry and also with compound fertilizer to drive this peak growth. Then for the rest of the season, we can either go with straight nitrogen, or if you're on low pK soils, the time to put in a number of extra splits there with 18612 or some other compound there is probably late April, early May, and another one in June. And the reason being is because you're growing so much, you might be growing 100 kilos per day. If the soil is index 1 or index 2, it just can't supply enough each day to keep up with the grass demand. So in terms of the phosphorus here, 50% in March, and the other 50% split in 2 splits, 25 and 25 there during that peak season. That's going to drive your peak higher and you'll be able to put more in the pit. And then we're into rounds of protected urea to see out in the back end of the year. That's a very simplified program, but what I wanted to do is emphasize we have different ground. We have any that are measuring, you'll have your own grass growth curves, and it's a bit like the analogy in the parlour. If you're in a feed to yield system, anybody that was ever in winter milk in the past, many lads will feed to yield rather than flat rate feeding because you don't want to waste concentrate on the cows that are not at peak lactation. It's the same deal here. Why not feed the paddocks or feed the fields to yield potential that they're capable of? If we put out a blanket rate application on some paddocks that are not either haven't got the right swards, the right soils, or are not just early ground or north facing ground, why have the nitrogen out there when it could be safe in the bag, and we'll use it when we get a better effect out of it. Lime, sulphur, two important things to think about as well. On dairy farms, probably more opportunities to lime after first cut silage on that stubble. What I would say there is go with the slurry if you're going with slurry at that time, and then come back 10 days later with lime. Don't put the lime on and then put the slurry because you're going to lose more nitrogen in that situation. Protected urea and lime, no issue. So we have done some work. There's more work to be done, but it's not like urea where you're going to lose more nitrogen with the lime. Protected urea reduces that pH spike and there's no issue. Build up P, front load it, but don't front load it too early when the water's running off. And in terms of potash, I would say it's fair game from July onwards. Don't go too late, especially on your free draining soils. Don't go the very last round because there's more of a chance that some of it will be leached. No issue there in terms of water quality with potash, but it is an issue if it's running through the soil and you're not getting the benefit out of it. Last slide then, just to put some figures on it. Early season fertilizer application, if we think about grass growth, this is I'm showing the 5-year average in terms of the blue line, and then 2019 and 2018 in terms of the green. You'll remember 2018 was very, very cold, and we had prolonged frost and that situation there in 2018. And in 2019 there was a kinder year in the spring. And you can see there, in terms of grass growth, In the cold year, when soil temperatures are low, we're there sitting around 5 kgs per day, right? For that period up to around mid-March when things take off. So Paddy's Day is a good line in the sand. If we think about 2019 there, the red line, a much kinder year. We started off there in January, early February, just around 8, 9, 10 kgs of grass growth. And again, we teetered along, we went up to around 15, hey presto, we hit Paddy's Day and things take off again. And if you take a 5-year average, which is probably better, there you can see there, grass growth ticks along there up to around the last week in February, early March before it really takes off. So again, this is kind of proof then that we don't need that much nutrients. We need some nutrients to drive a little bit of growth, but we don't need to have it all hanging out there too early. And what I would say is that second round is the place to really take off with your nutrients, get your compounds, get your slurries. If your slurries are going out here, all I would say to you is get a few loads away if your slurry storage is full. However, this is probably a better time to be using your slurry. We think about a program there, a well-timed protected urea or slurry in the first round. 25 kgs is plenty, either with the slurry or with the urea. We don't have any uptake for any more or potential. And then a well-timed 18-6-12 or compound or slurry there right before that onset to peak growth, just to drive it on. That would be the program of choice. Remember, soil temperatures, grass is not growing below 5.5 degrees. Grass won't grow if conditions are saturated. So again, there's no point in having that nitrogen hanging out there. So with that, I think I've preached enough, I think. I'm happy to take plenty of questions.
Thank you, David. A few questions have come in. So one was, does protected urea work on all soils?
Yeah, so we've looked at we have about 10 trials trying to cover as many soil types as possible. So it will work in all soils, both light and heavy. Lighter soils probably are more prone to losses of ammonia, either through the slurry spreader or through urea, because they're drier. So we all know that urea likes a bit of moisture. It helps it bring it into the soil. But what protected urea does is it protects that loss during dry conditions. It keeps it in. What I would say is anybody that used protected urea during the drought period, you weren't going to get any good results during drought period, but it wouldn't matter if you use CAN either. So what I would say in a nutshell is, yes, protected urea will work in all soils, but you have to give it a fighting chance of working in terms of following the weather a little bit.
Okay. And another one, has there been enough trials on protected urea to guarantee it does what it says on the 10? And I suppose there was a story as well about maybe water issues with it. You could just cover that too, maybe.
Okay. So in terms of the number of trials, I would safely say at this stage, we probably have enough trials. In the early years, going back three years ago, when the first results were out, we probably didn't have enough in this country on trials to be cast iron on it, but the indications were good. But at this stage, all the Teagasc farms are using it, all the research farms are using it, and have been using it for the last 3 years at this stage. And also then we have a group of monitor farms, so not research farms, but commercial farmers that are using it at this stage. And in general, there's no issues. People have had questions there because of drought and other issues, but I would say that I'm very confident. I'm using it myself. You know, it's a bit of a no-brainer in terms of the cost. We used to use urea and then switch over to CAN. I tried urea there, and because I'm working, following the weather was getting tricky there, especially if you have a prolonged dry spell. And with urea, you'd like to have a few mil of rain coming after it. So with protected urea, I can go whenever I need to go. after the cows come out or whatever, and I see no ill effects. In terms of the water thing, a urea product is safer than a can or a nitrate-based product. So if you think about what I said at the start there, nitrates are negatively charged, the soil is negatively charged, so the soil won't bind nitrates. If we think about a urea product, it's an ammonium product, so it's positively charged. So when you put urea into the soil will actually hold on to it. And look at, that's why farmers use it. It's not, it didn't come because of research trials or anything else. Farmers knew that they were getting good results in the spring, in the early season with urea, and that's why they use urea up to around April and then switched over to a can-based product when there's no leaching. So again, it's really safe.
Another question, why not put all chemical fertilizer application back to a week into February at the earliest? There would be very little drop in agricultural output doing this.
I would agree. In the majority, I would agree, Dermot. I think it's a very good point. What grass you'll grow there in January is questionable depending on the years. We seem to be getting wetter years nowadays. They can be milder, I will say, but they seem to be very wet, and we seem to be getting a lot more of that, and that is a good point. I suppose each farmer will know their own ground. They'll know that the conditions, you know, if I was to give advice for this year, it mightn't be really right for next year. But if we want to get on top of this as farmers and take control over what our destiny is, so if we don't take control of what I'm saying to you here is the regulators will come and take control and they'll shove it down your neck with rules. However, if we want to take this back and control it ourselves, we can do better. If we do better and we hold off for that week and get it right and save more of the nitrogen, have it going up in the grass, not to the water, then we'll be able to say back to them, look at, we've done our bit, things are going in the right direction again, leave us alone, take the pressure off. And that's basically the territory that we're in at the moment. The time is now, we can't afford to wait, because if we get another year where the EPA are monitoring it and they go to Europe and with more negative results, Europe is very impatient at this stage. They'll just come back to the department and say, right, your rules are not working, we need more of them. Or the other thing is, we need the full 20% cut, and now you're back, instead of 250, you're back closer to 200 kilos of nitrogen.
A slightly contrary question, I suppose, and that the Timoleague mini catchments, the soil temperatures have been increasing all week and are now above 6 degrees.
Yeah.
Would you spread it in now?
Soil temperature is right, but probably rainfall and water is probably not. So again, you know, we all know, we don't need to be told, if the tractor's gone out and putting even mini ruts because you're on dry ground, you probably shouldn't be out there. If there's more rain forecast, I'd hold off for a week, even if you are going into calving. I understand the conundrums only too well. You're focused on one thing, you don't want to be going around with a spinner. However, look at hand on heart, I'd have to say, hold off. Hold off. The soil temperature is right. We'll hopefully get through this rainy spell and there'll be a good week coming up. If you could get the nitrogen out there in good conditions, it would go into the soil, remembering that it's urea based that we're probably spreading at this time. It's positively charged, but we need it to get into the soil before the soil can bind it. If you're putting it on in wet conditions, it's going to run off before the soil gets a chance. So you do need a good week on it.
Yeah. Another one, the 20% nitrogen reduction, how would that be applied? Would it be evenly spread, or would the high users be hit harder, or how is that likely to happen?
It's unknown at the moment, Dermot. We don't know. We know the directive has come from Europe. However, it won't be meted out here in nationally or in all the member states more than likely till 2022. So there's probably, we're in a nitrates review year this year, as Aoife has quite rightly said. It could come in form of regulation in the 2022 once that nitrates comes in. However, we just don't know. It's more than likely to be a headline cut on total nitrogen in the bag. So instead of being allowed 250, we'll have to come back 20% of 250. That's a fifth of it. We're back to 200 if we were to take on the full 20%. That's going to affect, I don't know whether it'll affect all stocking rates, all stocking rate bands, those under 170, those over 250, but more than likely the derogation would be hit anyway, because they're the high nitrogen users, they're the ones that need it in some respects, and I suppose they're using it over a longer season. So I just don't know, to not making a smart answer, but we know that the regulation is there, but we just don't know how it's going to be enacted. But it is worrying.
Another question, how long does it take for an application of urea in February to have a cover of grass?
In terms of grass growth, if we're putting it on in February, if we're growing at 5 kilos a day, we're probably going at 5 kilos. We'll say what you're using there in a day is a fraction of that. You're using grams of nitrogen to grow 5 kilos. So in terms of what the soil is supplying, potentially what your slurry and what your residual nitrogen in the system is doing, you might shift it up a couple of kilos with the fertilizer, but it's probably not much more than that in January, in that January period. So I don't think there's a major penalty, or well, we know that there's not a major penalty because we've measured it in terms of what you're going to grow. It's about just getting the timing right. And urea versus CAN, there's no big issue in terms of supply. The demand is so low. So anybody that's in pasture base down there, or anybody that's measuring grass, look back and see what you're growing over that whole period from, we'll say, mid-January right up to about the 1st of April. And on the high grass growth, people that are growing more grass, or the high grass growth paddocks, if they're growing a ton and a half, maybe even the maximum, the pet field, the one that's your best yielder, it might grow 2 tons. On that whole period, right up to around the 1st or the 10th of April, the first round there, a ton of grass will take up 30 to 32 kilos of nitrogen, right? So if we think about a lot of paddocks only growing a ton in that period, over that whole period, there's only 32 kilos taken up. And most of that 32 kilos will be taken up, as the grass growth curve shows here, it'll be taken up from mid-March to the 1st of April. You can see the majority of it is in there. So what I would say to you is, keep it low, put out the bits, you'll know your own ground, but there's no point in over-egging it in here.
And just a question, there's another question here too, but you know, the way when you do put out urea or nitrogen and the grass greens up,
yeah,
have you more protein in that? Is that grass more valuable than if you didn't?
Potentially, there's a bit more protein. To be honest, the majority is water anyway. What you'll do is you'll build chlorophyll, so that nitrogen is going into the plant. You have a kind of a false protein, so you have non-protein nitrate in there. And I know in my region, Glanbia test for urea in the milk, and that's driven by that non-protein nitrogen. It's basically luxury nitrogen in the plant that's not really protein. It's just the luscious, rank green color that's not really extra quality, and probably if you were standing behind the cow, they'd hit you about 4 meters away with what's coming out the back end. So we've all seen it and we all know it when you go in on rank grass. yes, it will build some extra quality, but to be honest, it's probably non-protein nitrogen that you have there.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman?
Another one.
Chair here, can I come in for a second, if you don't mind?
Sure, yeah.
David, we launched our dairy efficiency program about 5 years ago, and I suppose one of the first things that we were pushing was that farmers need to get their cows out early, and the advice was the good guys get the first round of fertilizer done in January, and the guys that don't are the guys that don't achieve the grass growth. You're basically putting out science there tonight, which we can see there on the screen, which is saying that that's not the reason. So, would you mind addressing, what are the good guys doing that get their cows out early and have the grass there in February if it's not the first round of fertilizer?
Yeah. No, this is a great point, Ger, and thanks for putting that in there, because I want to be clear here. It's not about don't spreading. It's about how much do you need and getting your rate right. So when that advice came, and yes, extending the grazing season, the good guys are getting out early. You're trying to build a grass cover, but we have to be reasonable here in terms of what we can grow. Not every field, not every paddock can grow the same amount. We know that across the farm. And, you know, the half bag urea, which was the old advice, a lot of people, I won't say, I'm not pointing a finger or anything else, the half bag turned into a bag urea. It also turned into the slurry spreader going out and the urea. And we're now in a new era. Fertilizer is still relatively cheap. Lads won't like me saying it, especially in front of the co-op here, but it is relatively cheap. We always put out the little bit of insurance because it was, and to be honest, we were getting away with it here to now. Water quality was going in the right direction. Phosphorus was the biggest culprit. However, the game has changed now, and nitrogen now is the biggest culprit and probably the biggest issue for the dairy industry and for you as dairy farmers. So I won't say that old advice was wrong, but that old advice was trying to move in a direction where we try to build extra cover. That early grass is very valuable to get cows out after calving. However, we need to put out the rate that's appropriate for the amount of growth potential that's there. So half a bag urea is probably enough. It's certainly enough everywhere. I would say probably there's some paddocks there that probably don't need the full half bag. And this is more the nub of the issue rather than don't go. The other thing there is blanket spreading the farm. There's a third of the farm that you could hit with slurry. There's another third that you probably could hit with your half bag urea early. And there's probably another third that you shouldn't go near till the end of February because it's heavy soils. It's probably not going to grow. It could be north facing. It could be on a brow. It could be the last ones that you're going to graze. And
is another factor, David, which doesn't get as much attention. What separates the top guys from the guys is the residual grass from the autumn a factor on farms that have got the grass?
Huge.
To get the cows out. Because like you were saying, it's not growing. I mean, we're growing 5 kilos as opposed to 100 kilos at the peak. So like, I mean,
yeah,
but like, are the top farms got substantially more residual grass from the autumn? And is that the main factor?
Yeah, and it's all about how you close and how you manage and thinking about how you're closing in how you're going to graze to open. So, you know, what often happens there is because ground conditions are getting sticky, we're closing later and later, and we're closing the good ground because you can go on it there in the back end right up to into December. And we're on the same kind of ground here where I'm in Wexford. And, you know, you could have, depending on the year, you could have cows out right up to mid-December. However, the issue is that you're preferentially grazing the good ground that you probably want to hit in the very first round in the spring. And now you've grazed the scut, the grass down to the scut, and the grass doesn't have enough leaf there to grow over the winter naturally. And now you have low covers, and we're substituting in nitrogen. We're thinking that nitrogen is going to grow that grass and get it going there to put a cover back on that ground. So what I would say is the good guys are probably thinking, look at, some guys are going to have a natural advantage in terms of having all good ground. And then it doesn't matter as much. But if you have a 50-50 mix or even a 75-25 mix, what you need to have is, you need to have good ground with covers on it that you can let out cows early on, and then hopefully over that period there at the end of that first round into March, then when growth takes off, a well-timed fertilizer split, you'll put grass on that last paddocks that you grazed in the back end.
And what do you say to the guys that say that's a waste of time because the frost will burn off all that grass and all you're doing is wasting?
It won't though. It won't. That if you have leaf, you have much more potential to capture sunlight and to grow grass. And you know, the issue at this time of the year and going into the back end is low light levels for growing grass. So in low light levels, we're not going to grow. If you don't have the solar panels there on the ground to pick up that light, even low light, and have a cover there, even if it gets a bit tinged with grass, with frost, there's still a cover there to capture light. And once the plant can capture light, then it can grow more. If it's grazed to the scut and you've got it out in the back end, you're going to suffer in the front end. And probably getting cows that are calved down out to grass is going to pay more dividends in the spring than it will grazing for an extra week in the back end. There's no right and wrong here. It's horses for courses. That would be my advice anyway in terms of how you do it. You mind a bit of ground, leave a bit of cover on it in the back end. Yes, it means that you might have to house a week earlier, and that will pay dividends in the spring.
Yep. A couple more questions, David. Will there ever be protected urea product with P?
Okay, good question. So currently, if you're being sold a protected urea with phosphorus in it, I'd be very dubious. I'd be asking the salesman plenty of questions, and then I'd be also asking him for a bit of paper there to prove what he's saying. So currently, protected urea, which is the NBPT product, or there's a number of other variants of that, doesn't store in the bag with phosphorus in it. Okay, so protected urea, you won't get a true protected urea with phosphorus in it in terms of the conventional ones that we've tested and that are also on the list there that we have on the Teagasc website, or the Teagasc advisor will have, or potentially there at the dairy co-op, your advisors, Gavin or others, can get it for you. So that's the first thing that I'll say. Whether we will in the future or not remains to be seen. There is some work being done at the moment to try to build compounds to protect the protection on the urea from the phosphorus. The issue is that phosphorus is very acid in the bag, and when they're sitting there and stored in the bag, it breaks down the protection on the urea. So you will get a protected urea with sulfur, you'll get protected urea with potash. So you can get a protected urea NK, NKS, but you won't get an NPKS. But it would make life a lot easier there to have compounds with protected urea.
Yeah. There was another question here, most of it went on me, but protected urea and runoff, is it that just protected from runoff, I think was the gist of the question.
Well, look, at urea will melt if the ground is really wet and saturated, or you get a lot of rain and you put out your protected urea, before it gets into the soil, it can't be fixed. It's the same as every other fertilizer from that point of view. However, if you get a couple of dry days after spreading, and that protected urea, especially at this time of the year, will melt and move into the soil. So if there's enough capacity for the water to move into the soil with the protected urea, then it will be held tightly to the soil compared with a can type product. A can type product will either move through the soil or be flushed out of the soil a lot easier than a urea product. So I will say protected urea is safer during wet conditions.
Yeah, and would you comment on slurry additives?
Yeah, another common question. We're doing a lot of work at Johnstown Castle on slurry additives right at the moment. We have mini tanks developed there that we got made up with slats and the whole lot on them. They take about 2,000 gallons each, and we've tested a raft of products that are on the market and others. What I will say to you is, again, there should be a decent amount of caution applied with these products. Look for the credentials on the products. I'm not saying that they don't work, but look for a little bit of scientific evidence. So if the salesman has arrived in the yard or whatever, or we'll say even in terms of the co-op, they'll usually be stocking something that's middle and decent. They'll be able to furnish some science on the back of it. What I would be more dubious is somebody in a van arriving into the yard wanting to take the milk check with no literature, no evidence, but a good sales spiel. There's many products out there, many potions out there, and many of them don't work. So there's not a kind of a standard list like there is with fertilizers at the moment. Anything that takes a crust off slurry is good in terms of that you don't have to agitate it as much, but the chances are it's going to lead to more ammonia emissions and more nitrogen loss from the slurry, unfortunately. So that crust is actually your friend, even though it's not when you're trying to take a load out of it and that kind of a deal, or it's not when you have to go agitate the slurry, but the crust on the slurry is actually a good thing in terms of reducing the nitrogen losses and the greenhouse gas and the ammonia losses from that slurry.
Would that be tied to the trailing shoe, David?
Yes,
Yes,
Dermot,
yeah.
Dermot, yeah. It's the very same deal. So it creates a kind of a crust and stops the wind and whatever baking it off. Even in a large overground tank, we'll say the slurry circles, we'll say a crust on top of those is also a good thing. And in many other countries, they're actually forcing farmers like Denmark to actually put a roof, to put a cover over the top of the circular tanks.
Okay. I suppose for this advice and other advice, Gavin is our man on the ground. Gavin, would you like to come in and just...
Yeah, just to touch on a couple of things there, Donald, thanks very much. Look, I suppose a lot of this was covered in their first webinar back in the start of January there. So there's a couple of bits there available through our dairy efficiency program through the co-op. So the first one I touch on is our breeding advice for 2021. Breeding advice is available to all suppliers, so we're encouraging more AI use and use of high EBI bulls suited to your herd. I suppose looking at a 10 euro increase in EBI, it increases your profit by 20 euro per cow, and there's also a reduction in greenhouse gas by approximately 3%. So basically, look, it's just a one-on-one concept with the farmer, basically looking at his milk recording, looking at his EBI report, looking at his crop performance report, looking at the areas where he can improve on and selecting bulls in to improve that. The second one I'll touch on, our heifer rearing program. The aim of the heifer rearing program is to have all heifers at 22 to 26 months of age. ICVF studies over the last couple of years have showed that calving heifers at optimal age are leaving more profit behind you, they're lasting longer in the herd, they're producing about 15% more milk over their lifetime as well. You also don't have the carbon footprint from calving heifers at 3 years compared to 2, even extra year there that of idle time basically. So look, there's advice available there from calving or from birth all the way up to calving. So we're looking at colostrum quality, milk replacer feeding, weaning the calf, all the ways management through to first winter, and then all the ways up to breeding, and all the ways up to calm down at 22 to 26 months. The third one then I'll touch on is the grass and soil improvement program. Look, some very, very simple steps of what David outlined there, basically getting your pH right, looking at a line plan, and we're creating simple fertiliser plans for fellas, so I'm going through a lot of them at the moment. Basically, a lot of what David's actually spoken on there, just keeping it very, very simple, and putting out the right nutrients at the right time. And I suppose a major component of that is grass measuring, so we're offering assistance to every supplier if they want to go grass measuring, so we can map the farm, set the farmer up, show them how to use pasture base also. So that's a fantastic tool, and there's 101 things in pasture base, and I'm kind of find it hard to use it myself, and they're always adding a few more bits in. But even fertilizer, like recording fertilizer, and that is very handy. Recording lime is very handy in that. There is also, I suppose, Dorman, you touched there on our soil temperatures. Shanachco actually have a full weather station installed hopefully soon, so that'll be linked to pasture based data as well, so that'll be fantastic to get that locally, so we can share that on our WhatsApp group as well. I suppose there's just one thing to touch on is our NIR machine down below in Kinsale as well. I suppose there's a free service available to farmers. I think it's very crucial this time of the year to test forage to make sure that what you're feeding your freshly calved cow is correct, and there's a voice through reps on the road and that as well. But I suppose on our WhatsApp group as well, we test grass in Kinsale and in Eskeen throughout the year, so that's shared. You can always see, even at this time of the year, protein in the grass is quite high, so once you get close to the grass full time, there's no need to feed high protein in the ration, and look, our reps will advise that in the road, or you can contact myself. But look, it's just to highlight that as well. I think that's one of the main areas in the derogation as well, is to reduce group protein percentage in that. No, I suppose that's about it, Dorman, unless I'm after forgetting something there.
Yeah, thanks, Gav. If there were no questions for you, and afterwards you obviously covered everything well. For David, there is I suppose the comment is with slurry storage capacity as the anomaly of loose housing is technically providing, it's allowing people to hold more animals, I suppose, for the slurry storage they have.
Yeah.
It allows the derogation can numbers to look right. I suppose the comment is more than a question, really.
Yeah.
But
it's a good observation. If I just could comment on it, it's something that we're listening very close to what the department are saying at the moment, because it's obviously a concern. All these challenges that are coming now together are a concern, and what we're hearing from the EPA more so than from the Department of Agriculture is the issue over spreading and not having enough storage. And they are very animated about this at the moment. And it's something that I would be concerned that there'll be extra checks on farms, and that the loose housing, we'll say the house that's holding the straw bales, but is going down on the plan as a straw bedded house, that may be called into question in future. And storage is being talked about a lot by the EPA and the Department of Environment, more so even than the Department of Agriculture. So that's my only comment on it. Yes, it is an anomaly there, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. We saw what came out in the first consultation. There was part of that consultation was about the tables in Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 of the Nitrates Directive, and those tables are about slurry storage and that, and it'll be interesting to see what comes out in the review.
Thank you, David. Before I wrap up, I'll hand over to Jordan a second there, but I suppose I did a nitrates course back before Christmas, and one thing that was emphasised, but the single biggest thing a farmer can do is get his EBI right, improve the EBI of the herd, and I suppose tighten up the numbers. And I know we've had an ongoing thing about maybe EBI, maybe solids issues in Bandon, and I think we need to keep at it, like from every point of view, from sustainability, but from a profit and the farm point of view as well. So with that, I'll hand it over to Jor to wrap things up.
Thanks, Chairman. I suppose I'll just start off by thanking Gavin for organising the seminar. An excellent seminar and excellent attendance. I'd like to thank Aoife for her presentation. We're very supportive of the ASSA programme in Bandon. I suppose we're very proud that the river runs through our land and runs through our town, and we want it to be a source of pride and not a source of issue for us as farmers and the co-op. So you can count on Bandon there in the future. David, I'd like to compliment you as well on your presentation. As you were talking there, it was kind of reminding me of the new thinking that's going on in sports nutrition, and you're kind of doing some new stuff there tonight, for me anyway, on what I call soil nutrition. And I think what we've been doing in the early part of the year is a bit like the sports teams that were overtraining, and then they were flat for the championship basically. And that's what you're trying to get across there. We need to use more science, and I think we're going to have to do a re-education job, because, as I say, I was new to Bandon and I got educated that we needed to get out this fertiliser in January. We put huge resources into telling all our farmers to get out the fertiliser in January. So there is a re-education job to be done by everybody, Teagasc, the co-ops, Carbery, through Aoife. But listen, it's great to see the science, because when you can show it the way you are, I think people will accept it. And finally, look, I know we're under pressure for time. I'd like to thank all the people who turned up for the webinar, because that's what we do it for. And it's great to see again that we have over 70 people on the webinar tonight. And look, at the last webinar, I promised that we would recognise the attendance, and we are going to be sending out a token of our appreciation. Is we're going to supply a free thermometer to all farms for monitoring temperatures in the milking parlour cleaning systems, because we know that's an area of focus this year. So thanks very much to everybody, and thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thanks, Ger. One question which I can't answer. A question came in. Is it recorded? Will people be able to see it on the website, or?
It is done with chat, so if anybody wants to watch it again, they can contact myself. Yeah, I have that recording at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Gavin. Right, with that, thanks to the speakers. I think George did the detail of it there, and Gavin for organising, and thanks for attending. And we would hope to do something on breeding probably. Gavin, you might just say on that as well.
Yeah, look, we're hoping to do another webinar on breeding, maybe coming up to maybe late March or maybe somewhere around April time, hopefully. Just to I know some lads started a bit earlier than most, so just to maybe touch on that on bull selection there, and just encouraging more use and use of EVI bulls as well that are suited to your herd.
Yeah, thanks, Gavin. Sorry for going a little bit longer than we intended, but I think the questions were good in fairness. So thanks everybody, and good night, and we'll see you all again soon. Stay safe.
Thanks very much.